Hello and welcome to Psychology in Seattle. I'm your host, Kirk Honda, licensed therapist.
I'm Lita Vallis, edutainer.
And I'm Humberto Castañeda, Tuscan Raider.
We're here in Pioneer Square again for another episode. I thought I'd bring you guys down here to experience Sandplay Therapy. My colleague, Patrice Donahue, actually practices, her private practice is in this building behind us, Pioneer Building. And part of her practice is doing Sandplay Therapy. And I thought we'd run you guys through it and see what you thought.
That sounds great.
Sounds like fun, like going back to childhood, playing in the sand.
Building little castles, and I hear she's got all these toys, miniature toys. This sounds like a great time.
Patrice,
hi. How are you? Nice to see you again.
This is, oh yes. This is Lita and Humberto.
Hello. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
Humberto, nice to meet you. Come on in.
Today we'll be exploring a modality of therapy called Sandplay Therapy with Patrice Donahue, licensed therapist as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I taught at Antioch University, Seattle for about 10 years, and every quarter that I taught, there was usually one or two students that I found to be exceptional, that I would notice for their intellect or their counseling abilities. And one of those students was Patrice Donahue. I remember she would come up to me after class actually and ask questions that I didn't really know the answers to, and the nature of her questions indicated that she was really thinking and had, I think, a fair amount of wisdom, which I think is good for counselors to have. After Patrice graduated from Antioch, she hired me as a consultant where we would talk about once a week about her work with her clients. And one of the modalities that she employs is Sandplay Therapy. And I don't have much experience in that, so she would explain that to me, and I was fascinated by it actually. And she actually ran through a session with me, and I felt it was actually quite powerful modality of therapy. So I thought that we would come down here and experience this mode of therapy and sort of get the word out about it, because I don't think very many people know about it. Mm-hmm. So Patrice, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you wanting to explore this topic. I think it's a wonderful one, and I'm very excited about the work you're doing and helping to get other people exposed to different modalities of work. So it's great.
Yeah. So I thought the best way to demonstrate this modality is to have Lita and Humberto actually go through this with you, and then afterwards we can discuss their experience having gone through it. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, it is. And the way we're going to do this today is Humberto and Lita have not actually been exposed to any of the thinking or the theory, if you will, on Sandplay, so that they can have the most authentic experiences they can. And each of them will do it individually, and we will discuss it afterwards so that they can, again, have as much of an authentic experience as they can. So.
Yeah. Well, so let's invite them in one at a time, and they'll go through it with you.
Great. Sounds good.
Okay. So,
Humberto, I want to spend a little time kind of introducing you to the Sandplay room and the different parts of this work. So what you have before you are two sand trays. One is wet and one is dry. You're welcome to work in either one of them. As you see in here, the bottom is blue, and the sides are blue. So you're welcome to move the sand, mold the sand, do whatever you wish to do. Obviously, you're new to this room and to this particular collection, so I'd invite you to, take your time looking at what's there, and just really allow yourself to be to whatever objects may be calling out to you. Sometimes it's not even something we necessarily like, but for some reason it's really resonating. Just allow yourself to just have your experience and see whatever's calling to you. I will be sitting over in the corner. This is primarily a nonverbal process. If you certainly have a question at all as you're going through this, you're welcome to ask me and I'll certainly answer. And when you're done, you can indicate that to me and I will come and sit beside you. And if there's part of the tray or the experience you want to share, we'll talk about it then.
That sounds great, yeah.
Okay.
You know, I could spend days doing this. I could like just do this for a living. This is a lot of fun. It's, at first I didn't really know, I didn't have an idea or anything. I think like you said, I started looking at things that resonated somehow. The first couple things I picked when I was little, I had an R2-D2, and it's very close to me. And Playmobil I used to love when I was little too. So those two figures I picked right away. Papa Smurf to me was a good icon to represent like the wise. I love movies, right? So I think like Yoda, or every like epic has like the wise and the old man or woman who knows a lot. So that was a good one. It's the hero's journey, basically. They start with some big quest where they're told they must go down this path. There's like this big obstacle for them. What they don't know is hidden under here is like this huge whale, this huge leviathan, basically. So at this point, like, do you encourage like the clients? Do you encourage them to try to find meaning, or do you keep it more open-ended?
It's open-ended. Yeah, it's really the story that's resonating with them at the time, and if there were any particular areas where there were particular feelings or impact, or
right,
and just this is now open to this, right?
Right.
So allow it to move where it will. This has been very powerful work, you know, that you've done, and I would really encourage you to write up the story, and also really pay attention to your dreams that might come across in the next bit of time, because this is very powerful material you've worked with, and I expect that it will continue to resonate with you and move.
So I get a little enter my subconscious and maybe manifest in dreams. That's cool.
And I will, you know, once we're done here, I will take photographs, and so we can have a record of this going forward.
Well, thank you very much.
It was really a pleasure to work with you.
It was a pleasure to do it. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. So, Lita, welcome. I'm going to spend a few minutes right now kind of orientating you towards the room and the collection and the process, you know. Obviously, we have all of these miniatures here. You're welcome to work with any of them in any shape. I have rocks and sticks and all kinds of things are in baskets around the ground. So I would invite you to take some time and just allow yourself to kind of get to know these. And, you know, what I generally say to clients is to kind of allow the objects and to see what resonates with you, and not necessarily it's like, oh, I don't like that. It's like, well, for some reason it might be resonating, so it might be interesting to select that.
You don't guide me, I just do whatever I want to.
Absolutely. You do whatever you want. It's a completely open, free space for you to do whatever you wish.
All right.
All right. So I'll be over here.
Okay.
So how was this for you?
So basically it's an arc of my life. There was one moment particularly on the beach of Greece. I was by myself, and I remember sitting on this beach of Greece halfway around the world by myself, and it was my first true feeling of total independence. I'm like, wow, like nobody, I was in, you know, like 20, some early 20s after college, so I was like, nobody knows where I am. I can do absolutely anything I want, and there is no one to know about it or, you know, judge it, or like I can do anything. Not that I actually did anything, but I could have. Right. This is about studying different religions. And these guys over here, I don't know, I've always liked like wise old people that have lived life already.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story with me.
It was fun.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Patrice, what attracted you to Sandplay Therapy?
Well, Kirk, when I was a graduate student at Antioch, I had actually heard from another student that there was a therapist who did a demonstration of Sandplay Therapy. And all I'd heard was that she had miniature figures and people were placing them in the sand, and their experience was a very powerful one. So just hearing about it, I was intrigued. And I did seek out that particular therapist. One of our assignments at that time was to actually interview a therapist. So I went and interviewed the Sandplay therapist and experienced that in her office myself. And then I went ahead and sought out a Sandplay therapist who I then engaged in my own process. While I was, finishing my training as a therapist, I was having my own experience doing a Sandplay process, but I wasn't studying Sandplay per se. I was studying the other therapy foundations, but not that per se. And then when I completed my process, I went ahead and began my study process. And we have a number of organizations. There's a national organization of Sandplay therapists, and there's also an international organization. The founder of Sandplay Therapy her name is Dora Kolf, and she was a Swiss woman who actually lived during the time of Jung and actually engaged with Jung and had consultations with him, and he was very encouraging of her exploring this modality. And so that being said, this is the tradition of Sandplay Therapy comes from Jungian psychology. And then regionally, I, a couple years ago, realized that there are a number of Sandplay therapists around, but we didn't know each other kind of regionally. So I went ahead and tried to get us organized, sent letters to lists that I had. And so now we have, it's about 2 years old now, a Northwest Sandplay organization, which my passion around that is to help other therapists become trained in this. So people who are not Sandplay therapists, but are licensed therapists, to also get trained and learn this modality, because I think it's a very, very powerful tool, and the more people that could be trained, the happier I would be.
I imagine it's also good for Sandplay therapists to get together and talk.
Yeah, it's very great. Yeah,
it seems like you'd be fairly isolated from each other.
And to continue our, part of our study is to really be exposed to Sandplay cases and continue to learn and deepen our work. So we do it as well as building community as well as our own, furthering our education. And
people are appreciative of it too, right?
Yes, people are very, very excited. I think we started out, I think I sent out a letter to, I had asked for the national organization for a list of people in Washington, Oregon, Montana, British Columbia. I took the whole Northwest, and I was very nervous that there'd be like 300 names, and oh my goodness, and I got 26 names. And out of the 26 names, 16 people said, sure, I'd love to get together. So I put together what I call gatherings at the Arboretum here in Seattle. And 40 people came, and our list is about 80. Not all of those are trained Sandplay therapists, but they're people that are very interested in it and wanting to get further training, etc. So it's a variety of people that are involved in our group.
Great. And it's growing, isn't it?
It is. It continues to grow.
Yeah.
And we've had a number of gatherings, and probably next year we're going to try to put together a more solid kind of training program. We do have trainings here and there, but I'd like to have more progressive type training regionally. So that's where we're headed.
Great.
Yeah. The key ingredients to Sandplay Therapy is that it's a nonverbal process, and that's very important and it's also about providing a free and protected space, and by that we mean that the therapist is holding the space in a way that everything is possible and everything is accepted. So you have your sand trays, they have boundaries to them. The size of them is particular because you can take it all in one view. You don't really have to move your head around, so you can take in this picture of the world that you have created. We use these different miniatures that you see behind me to construct these worlds, but part of it is about play. And so one of the great things about play is it's a great intermediary between the internal world and the external world. So as you're engaged in this process, you're activating your conscious and unconscious, and there's a tremendous healing potential in the sand. One of the things that Jung talks about is that the psyche is always moving towards wholeness. I mean, that's its general orientation. And so to the degree that we can facilitate that, there can be healing that can take place. So part of what we're hoping to do is to provide this free and protected space for the psyche to do the work that it needs to do, and the therapist's role during the Sandplay process is to hold but not interfere. And so we also do not interpret trays. When the client actually, after they've completed the tray, the therapist will go sit beside them, and if the client wishes to speak about it, they will, and if they don't, it's fine. And it's really what they speak about. Sometimes there are things that have happened to wounding that has happened in a person's life, could be very early, it could be pre-verbal, in which there's an ability to go back into those places and work them again, kind of between the conscious and the unconscious, and have them actually be able to resolve themselves. And so aggressions and repressions, etc., can actually work themselves again in this tray that's boundaried and being held by the therapist in a way that actually moves them so that they can be, that energy can now be available for creative and full life. That's the general process. And when we talk about a process, usually it's this process of the ego, if you will, because sometimes, as you know, the ego can form in a way that is over dominant, or it can be kind of a false ego that came about because it needed to be very protective. And so the sand allows you the ability for the ego to right itself in relationship to the rest of the psyche, if you will.
Meaning that when they're working in the sand, the ego doesn't necessarily know how to manage that, doesn't know how to defend themselves, and, and it just...
So then there becomes a rapport that can occur within the other parts of the psyche, because the ego is a part of the psyche, but it can kind of dominate, and it can dominate in ways that aren't always helpful to the individual. So the sand allows that to happen. And my experience is that sometimes there are elements that we're not even conscious about that can appear in the sand and begin to resolve themselves and move themselves towards consciousness.
Kind of like a feedback where they're putting something out there and then something resonates with them, and then they might go with that.
And then it begins to continue to work itself out, because again, that notion that there's an innate energy toward wholeness if the opportunity is presented and given. And that's what the holding of the therapeutic relationship is, and the Sandplay in particular. And the nonverbal process allows one to access the unconscious in a much more powerful way, especially with the symbols as well activating things. So,
do you refer to the sand tray at all when you're talking in your normal, face-to-face?
Sure, therapy? We can. There may be a reference to, and again, it's only things that have been spoken about by that client, but there may be a reference, the client may make a reference to it. Sometimes there's ways in which sand plays can feel like a dream. They have that same resonance, that same power. So you may remember when I had that figure and I had the mirror in front of them and that felt, so there certainly are references at times.
I would be tempted to refer to something that they hadn't referred to. Is that hard?
It's not hard, because the position, the posture of the therapist is very much as witness. It's for me, and for other Sandplay therapists, it's a very kind of sacred holding. I mean, it's an extraordinary witnessing to see this client's story unfolding, and there's just a deep curiosity, and we can look at a certain symbol and think, oh, that symbol generally means this, that, or the other thing, but it may not mean that for that particular client. It may not mean that in there. So part of it is the client's story that goes with it. And there are times I also have a deep respect for the unconscious, and so for me, sometimes there may be an object that is in the tray that is not referred to by the client at all. For me, that would be a terrible intrusion for me, because this may be the first little peeking out, if you will, of the unconscious in this particular aspect that is really wanting to see the light of day, if you will, and become more conscious and become more integrated into this individual's life. But if suddenly there's a spotlight placed on it, then it may, retreat and not feel. And so all things are accepted, the most tender to the most aggressive, because all of these things are the energies that are needing to be expressed and worked through. So
what'd you guys think?
It was great.
Yeah, it was really fun. I would actually like to do it again.
Really?
Yeah.
It was for me, it was very playful and fun, and I did think about different things from my life. It was reflective and in a good way, in a really good way. It was a good experience.
Did you discover anything?
I think I discovered what I find important about my life. Like the things I chose to use told me when I look back at my life, because I did my life story, so when I look at my life, the things that I remember or think are important enough to bring forward, it makes me go, oh, so those are the things I consider important or valuable. Because there's really important things from, like events from my life that I didn't include.
Just it's an outward representation of how you're thinking.
Yes, right now in this moment. And I think it's interesting that, like, usually people come back time after time. So every day, different things come out because different things are important on that particular day.
Yeah, for me it's interesting. It started random, and I was just choosing things. I thought it was random anyways. And at first it was more about picking, like, what should I pick? I didn't have an idea for what I was going to do, and then it all started kind of organically evolving into a story, and then I really got into telling the story, so then I was very more specific about what I was selecting, and by the end I was actually taking a lot more time to pick an individual piece and place it just because the story needed it.
Can you see how this would be helpful for clients?
I think it works your right brain, or your less literal part of yourself, and that I don't think you could do this once and necessarily come out with a new life or something, but it certainly taps into that child part of you, the more basic, symbolic, and there's a freedom to it. It's a lot of, like, you're playing in the sand, literally, and I felt free to, like, just play. I mean, it's been a long time since I sat down and played with little figurines, and all of a sudden I'm like, I remember why this was fun. I don't know what point I crossed that in my life where I was like, too old for... I never literally said I'm too old, I just stopped playing with things. And all of a sudden here I am playing with the little figures, and I'm like, this is fun. And that part of it, I think, brings something that you don't normally talk about or experience as an adult.
Did Patrice's presence help at all or change your experience at all?
I liked the fact that it was very open and unstructured, but that it was very welcoming. So, that was neat. It was like, here you go. And then there was almost like like you were bringing a child into play, not in a condescending way. It was just more like, here's the sand, here's the toys, go to it. And I loved that. That was really nice.
We don't get that very often.
No. Normally it's like rule.
Right. Actually, I found Patrice's presence, I at first was expecting more guidance. Like, I was like, you mean I can just do anything? And you're not going to be telling me step by step as we go what it means or the symbolism? Wait a minute, that's not what I expected, that it would just be open, free playtime. I was expecting that you were observing what I was doing, and at the end you were going to come and give me a symbolic meaning of my actions, and how I chose the figurines means this about my personality. So having you there, I wasn't thinking about that, but I was like, I wonder if she's going to analyze the way that I put this down, and then moved it twice.
Well, and I think that's common, especially when people first start the work, because it's very vulnerable and it's very visible, and my position is to hold you and watch you the whole time. So it's understandable, but that's part of what we don't want to have happen, so that it continues to resonate and it continues to expand within your being. And suddenly putting definitions or things would be inappropriate and really premature.
Which is excellent too, because I think there's a kind of a public distrust sometimes of, you see this in movies a lot, the guys being psychoanalyzed and draw something, or they show them the Rorschach chart, and then they get immediately judged by it's like, oh, he's a psychopath, right? Which may be true, but in this case, it's nice to know that I'm not going to be judged. That I put this guy here doesn't mean I was dropped on my head, even though I was. That doesn't correlate immediately, and that's nice. It's the safety of, I'm going to create, I'm going to explore. It doesn't necessarily mean this or that. It might, over time, I might discover new things about myself.
And the idea is that that inside of the client lies the healing power, and that with this expression, that healing will occur.
Yeah. So the idea is that the psyche is always moving towards wholeness, and very often when we're
talking and using this part of our brain, but there's a lot of defenses that come up that really kind of keep us from experiencing it. If you're in a safe container with the tray, there's ways in which you can begin to experience things that may have been very wounding and difficult for you at a certain point, right? And they get to be expressed here, and that energy, which is locked in that woundedness, then becomes available as it goes through this healing. It becomes available for your lived life, your creative life. And the nonverbal part allows one to access the unconscious in a way that's not always that accessible when we're doing talk therapy. So it's part of the relationship. It's another modality. I think it's great because it has dimension to it, and it's accessible to people as opposed to some other, you're picking objects. It's not about whether you can draw a straight line or all that. So.
Yeah, there's no skill like you have to have. You can pick objects and place them.
I was just thinking that next time, if I was going to do it again, I would get three-dimensional. Like you said, we could dig down in the sand or like make it wet and build sculptures.
The digging in, I didn't do too much, but I buried a couple of things. And that was really interesting because the idea of hiding something, and I was kind of self-aware that I'm sure that has some significance, right? But it was fun to no one will know this is here. That was kind of neat.
But just to be clear, if you were to bury something, there's obvious symbolism to that, but that's particular to the person, and not you wouldn't think, oh, that means this.
There's no automatic judgment.
There's a curiosity, as there, you're holding the curiosity with your client about kind of what's bubbling here, what wants to be known.
One little takeaway that I got just from today's session alone, if I never come back, I was saying that I noticed in my story arc, so there's one big part of my story that I always include, like if anybody ever asked you about your childhood, I had this one thing, and like my sister died when I was a teenager, and I always include that in my story. Well, today I included nothing about it. I didn't even think about it until after it was all done. I'm like, oh, I didn't include that. So the one little takeaway that I'll have just from today's session is that, wow, that part seems to be more healed or complete than it was the last time I thought about my life story, which was, maybe a year or two ago.
Well, this was really great for me personally. I'm sure I'm not speaking.
It was really great. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having us. I feel like I kind of want to continue. Honestly, I'm very curious to follow this maybe into therapy for myself.
Might have to go to Toys R Us and see if they have sandboxes.
That's right.
At home.
Yeah, buy new batches of Legos and sand.
Well, I just really want to applaud your openness to do this, because it is powerful work and it takes a lot. So I'm impressed with your curiosity and your openness, and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Patrice, thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure, Kirk. Thanks so much.
Thanks for demonstrating the Sandplay Therapy. I think that Umberto and Lita seem to really like it.
I think they did.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Psychology in Seattle. We'll see you next week.